All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are. Thank you for tuning in. This is AH1, the Asian Highway, Storytellers in Action. We are in week 8 out of 10. We're almost at the end of our journey here. It's been quite the journey so far. We've talked to a lot of different people from a lot of different parts of the world. Tonight, we have a couple of guests in studio here. One of them is an old friend of mine. I haven't seen her in several years. Her name is Tani Ikeda. She's the founder of Immediate Justice. She's won an Emmy. She was titled once 25 Visionaries Who Are Changing the World. She's done a lot of great things. We also have here one of her friends who's a radio host. Her name is, I'm going to have to say the whole name here. It's Chavonne Vita Star Taylor. She's from South Central LA.
Vita Star represent.
Right. She's a radio host. So we're going to talk to her about some of the stuff she's worked on. She's also worked with Vita, or not Vita. See, you got me. She is Vita. Yes.
Vita Star.
Yes. No, but she's worked with Tani on a couple of projects. So we're going to talk to them in a minute. I want to rope in my two co-hosts here, Medha and Debesh. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple issues here. I wanted to start, first of all, on this news of the 2020 census. And believe it or not, we're almost at 2020.
Crazy.
Time flies. But one thing that's controversially come out about the census is this whole question of whether you have to answer your citizenship. I guess the last time the census had a question of your citizenship was in 1950. So we went through...
How long ago was that? That's
68 years ago. So at least 70 years between censuses.
That's a real throwback.
Yeah, make America great again, right?
Scheiße.
So I'm curious. We actually do have someone here who could maybe shed some light on Medha, if you want to jump in on this and talk a little bit about when you fill out the census and you see that question, if it's on there, kind of what would be your first reaction or thought?
Well, the first question when I fill up a census is what box to tick, because we often don't have a South Asian box. There's Asian, and then there's Hispanic, non-Hispanic, something. I get categorized as non-Hispanic at the doctors, which I haven't really figured out why
So I
or
can,
what that means.
really quickly, I can talk to that as an epidemiologist. When we do surveys, the standard is you ask race and ethnicity, right? And so I believe it falls under race, but I'm not 100%. It's been a while. But either you're going to be Hispanic or not Hispanic, and that goes for everybody.
And that comes from that's in terms of race.
Correct.
Right,
I believe.
ethnicity,
I believe that's for race.
Mm-hmm.
So I am currently on a work visa. I don't have a green card. I don't have American citizenship. I'm an Indian citizen. I'm a privileged person, and so therefore I can play by the rules and apply properly. It's a challenge to apply. You have to have a job. Your job has to sponsor you, this and that. Lots of paperwork. But this country is also run by a significant amount of the I'm not so sure what to call them, people who aren't citizens. And I think they're a very important part of this country, and they make up a lot of the infrastructure of this place. So I struggle because, there's this movie called Like Crazy. I don't know if you've seen it before. And it's the premise is that there's a British woman and an American guy, and she overstays her visa, and their love story just falls apart. When I watched the movie, I just thought, oh, stupid woman, you could have totally solved your visa issue. And so I get annoyed when people from privileged backgrounds can do things to find their way into this country. And I'm like, oh, you didn't do the paperwork properly. But this is a whole sector of America that's very, very important to the country. And I do think that adding this into the census is not right.
I would agree with you. Debesh, you have any thoughts you want to share on that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, even besides a lot of the things that have been discussed that, some of the results or some of the potential outcomes of introducing this question into the census, again, just from a very basic standpoint, your survey is only as good as however many people participate in it. That's a central dogma of any kind of survey taking. And by the fact that you're inserting a question that could potentially, dissuade or discourage people from participating, takes away from the significance or statistical significance of said census. And so just from a technological or a scientific standpoint, it's not going to be a very accurate census, which therein defeats the purpose of the census.
Sure. We're going to put a pin in this conversation. I want to bring our two guests here on this topic when we get to that in a minute. But before we get there, I wanted to bring up a second topic, and this happened in Sacramento last week. There was another police shooting and death involved of a young man, 22-year-old named Stephen Clark, African American, was shot in the dark 20 times. One thing, I mean, it's again, it fits all the buckets of what we see in this country and what's being done in what I believe a wrongful manner, but that's a different discussion. What I want to talk about, at least from one good thing I saw out of all this, was the Sacramento Kings, the owner of that team, Vivek Ranadive, before the game, had grabbed the microphone at center court. I want to read a quote that he said, and he said this: "We stand here before you, old, young, black, white, brown, and we're all united in our commitment. We recognize that it's not business as usual, and we're going to work really hard to bring everyone together to make the world a better place." So it's great to see him see this. It's a great contrast to what we see in the NFL. You know, you have one owner here talking about how he's welcoming protests. It's your right. It's something he could do.
An owner who is an immigrant.
And he's an immigrant, exactly. And this is welcome in this space. So I kind of want to get kind of your thoughts on this, and then we'll transition to our two guests on this topic. But I'll start with you two first. Just dive in. What's your first reactions to what happened and to some of the reactions since? I
was very glad because South Asians stereotypically are not very good at integrating with other communities. Once again, stereotypically. And to see someone who's a thought leader, someone who's in a position of power, who owns a basketball team, making a statement like this is very powerful. So I was happy to see him do that.
I think what I really liked about the whole way the thing unfolded is that when Vivek Ranadive was later interviewed about the whole incident, he brought up the fact that he wanted to get into the mind of this young man that was protesting. And that's why he brought him in and actually sat down with him and spoke with him, because he wanted to get inside his mind so he himself could better understand what the community's needs are. Because he's always thought, and I read about this, he always thought that their arena for the Sacramento Kings, it's a meeting place for the city. And so he's trying to be a community leader by getting this information from a community member, which I thought is wonderful, and it really plays into the mission of our podcast here as well.
Right. So I'm going to bring this now. We have two lovely women here who could chime in on this, and they've both actually worked on a film called Resist, and I think I don't know if there's any relevance to what you did on that project and some of the issues you covered there, and what's happened in Sacramento, and what's actually happened nationwide. So let's bring in Chavonne and Tani. Tani, let's start with you. Kind of, what's your thoughts on what happened in Sacramento, and how does that relate to what you've been working on? And let's start with that.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. And, something that Patrisse Cullors, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, would always say is when we stop feeling, they win. And, I documented her for 2 years around the country, and she was a part of the rapid response team that would get a call in the middle of the night and hear that somebody had been shot by the police. And she would go to the family and ask, "What do you need? What do you want?" And so to see somebody who I cared about and to sort of bear witness through documentation, it always amazed me at her capacity to continue to show up in that way for Black folks, and to also not get hardened by that experience of the tremendous pain. So it always really, when a tragedy like this happens, I think those words are one of the things that sticks with me, because it's so easy when you're looking at something like this on your screen to start to feel like this numbness, like you want to look away or you don't want to let it affect you deeply. And I think that's the first thing that you have to allow. We all have to let ourselves be broken by this.
Yeah.
And so I would say, like, let yourself, let your heart be broken. And, just to kind of talk a little bit more about where I'm coming from, this past year, I've been documenting organizers on the front lines of the resistance against white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And I've been filming with the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. I've filmed with the co-chairs of the Women's March. I marched 18 miles with them. From the NRA headquarters to the Department of Justice while hordes of white men armed with assault rifles intimidated and taunted them. We were in Charlottesville as neo-Nazis beat Black and brown youth. We filmed as hundreds of protesters at LAX chanted, "We welcome you," to those who'd been separated from their families after the Muslim ban. And it's amazing to me to think that like all of this has happened in the span of a year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that the Trump administration has done this much damage. And that's not even factoring in, the documentation that we've done in Los Angeles with undocumented families and the ICE raids that have occurred. So, I want to reiterate, resistance has been, following Black Lives Matter, but it's also been a number of other communities that have been impacted. And so I think what's powerful is resist has been undocumented folks. It's been trans, queer folks. It's been the Muslim community, folks from the Women's March. And I think pretty organically, people are working in coalition out of necessity. So I think what I see is this: America is at war with itself. And Reverend Sekou, I think, really illustrated that when we interviewed him in Charlottesville. He said, like, what he saw that day was a civil war. But instead of defending democracy from German Nazis, fascism has taken the symbolism of our own national anthem and Star-Spangled Banner. And anyone who dares to take a knee against racism is deemed an enemy of this country. We're living in interesting times, and I think as a filmmaker, a Japanese American filmmaker whose family has a legacy of cameras being taken from us in the camps. It's interesting to trace the desire to document this particular moment of resistance and think about what is our responsibility 75 years later.
Tani, so obviously we know you're involved in a lot of projects, either as a director or as an activist. One such project that you founded was Immediate Justice, which really you helped to foster young females working in virtual reality, as I come to understand. First of all, you founded that when you were 21. I don't think I could, at 21, even spell nonprofit, and you founded one. So first of all, what was the impetus or mission behind founding it? And then, how, since you founded it, as it is a storytelling medium, how has it evolved?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was started with a bunch of my best friends, including Bonnie, who's here in studio with us. And part of it was, one, there was so much excitement in, getting selected, that being that one person from your community that gets to go to USC Film School. Born and raised in Seattle, I come to Los Angeles. This is Hollywood. This is palm trees. This is everything for a kid who wants to make movies and like represent her community. Mm-hmm. And then you're there, and I was like the only like non-white kid, and it just, everything about it felt wrong. And we got to use such nice equipment, and it was like in this big studio, and it's in the middle of South Central, and I just felt like it's not enough that I'm like the only person who gets to use all this cool shit. And then maybe when I graduate, like I get to make a film. But who knows if I like get to convince somebody to give me money to make my film.
Right.
And so I was like, you know, half of these kids don't even have real stories to tell. Like they have, like we're coming straight out of high school and they don't even know what they want to make films about. Like, let's devise a plan to get all of these resources into the community. Like, let's just do that. So, you know, me, Vani, like all of our other friends were like, let's just create like a summer camp. And like the film school didn't know we were doing this, like sneaking youth into like the basement of the film school. And like, you know, there were a couple allies in the process, like adult allies in the process. But the other thing that was really interesting was it was kind of around the time that like soda pop companies were doing these online voting contests. So we got our seed money from Pepsi, of all things, by getting people to vote for us on Facebook and Twitter. Oh, nice. We won $50,000 to get all of our own equipment.
That's a lot of Pepsi, too.
Yeah. It is a lot of Pepsi. It was like us downing Pepsi to find these like little codes that were on the caps that could give us like PowerPoints. But it was so bad because we were just like downing Pepsi, and like people were like stealing Pepsi and just like unscrewing the caps to get the power codes. It was so unethical. But anyways, but we won that money. Right. And it was for the community. And
how Robin Hood of you.
The community powered by Pepsi.
Yeah, and that's how Immediate Justice started. And it just felt like such a good like win for us. And we all got paid that summer, and we just started to like make what we felt like was real shit that we were that we were excited about.
I remember when we started and we were raising that money, we actually threw like a lot of big house parties, and you had, in order to get in, instead of like a fee, you had to bring a Pepsi. And that was how we were able to, you know, raise some of that money. But the important thing, especially with me being involved, I was really, me being from South Central, me also, at the time, I know Tani, I know her from USC. I got the opportunity to go to USC because of a scholarship program we have in South Central. And one of the things, I felt the same way, like, how do I have access to this stuff and my community doesn't have access to it? And these are things that are going to help us be able to build careers in all kinds of spaces. So with Immediate Justice, it was really important that we not only support the community, but we make sure the community knows that there's a whole other world of careers. There's a whole other way to tell your story. We really started, even before it was officially Immediate Justice, remember that first film project we did? We just recruited some girls from South Central, and they were telling their stories. I believe it was about immigration and being undocumented, or their family members being undocumented. And that's really like how important it is to show that these stories exist. Sometimes people don't attach faces, they don't attach people to the stories that they hear on TV. And we were able to give a space for people from our communities to do that. And that was something that, you know, we talked extensively about, especially around with Immediate Justice, especially right now, we're looking at more than just representation. That's like the big conversation right now, right? Mm-hmm. We talk about representation. Oh, we don't have enough people of color getting Oscars or whatever it is. Me personally, I don't care about an Oscar. That's just my personal opinion on that. However, I do believe that all this conversation around representation, it doesn't include a conversation around economic empowerment. What's happening behind the camera? What's happening in the studios? Who owns the studio? So we're also preparing these girls not only to just think about getting jobs, and we're helping them get jobs because we know we got to get a check. That's important too. Feeding your family, taking care of yourself is important. However, we're also looking at how are we going to be able to let girls know that there are positions of power that they can be in, especially girls of color? Because how many of us are even in those spaces? So with immediate justice, we're looking more than just representation. We're looking at how do we create economic development? How do we create powerful spaces and empowering spaces for girls of color and women of color in the industry?
So this question is for Tani. Like we were saying earlier, you're obviously involved in a lot of projects. Again, whether as a director or as an activist. With all these projects that you have going on, what's the common thread that ties it all together into your own personal mission? And secondly, just reading through your body of work, where do you get the energy to do all this? Do you take 5-hour energy like every 5 hours? Like how does it work? So
That's such a funny question.
because it's a lot, right? I mean, what fuels you to do that, and how does it tie into your own personal mission and vision, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was just having a conversation with somebody recently who was talking about her healing process. And one of the things that we have both gone through is we're both survivors of sexual assault. And I think this has been like a very core part of what has driven me. And I think recently, one of the things that this friend said is, I knew that I was really starting to heal when I started to get mad. And my rage became like the tip of a spear towards healing. And the reason why I thought that was interesting is because all the women in my family have a hard time getting angry. They're really lovely women, but whenever something makes them upset, they are very good at pacifying themselves. And so to get in touch with what is really bothering me about the things that happen in our society and the things that have specifically happened to me, the kind of violence that occurs, it's been this slow burn of trying to slowly dial into, I think, my rage, if I'm being honest right now. And I think a lot of young women are taught that rage is not something you're supposed to express and that it's dangerous. But sort of the older I get, I'm realizing that my rage, if it's unexpressed, it turns into depression.
Yeah.
And so if I express it in its purest form, it's like a lightning rod. And it's not explosive in a violent way at all. It's like joyful. And I know people aren't supposed to say like rage is a joyful thing, but like rage in a project is like fucking fire. And so when people are like, why do you have so much energy? I'm like, because I'm fucking mad. I am so mad that I don't sleep at night.
Is it would you classify it as like sort of a liberation or a release of that rage?
So I have this project called Survivor Love Letter, and it started literally on the anniversary of of my assault, and it was like the week leading up to Valentine's Day. And anniversaries are always kind of a weird thing for me where, it's like Valentine's Day is like such a widely celebrated holiday where people give people flowers and chocolate, and you can't like really avoid the build up to it. It's like there's like hearts everywhere. And it would just like give me anxiety. And it would honestly every year make me want to kill myself. And so that year I was like, let me do the opposite of what I do every year, which is like go into a dark depression. And I'm going to instead, like, I just wrote myself like a love letter. And my love letter was like, you know what? You deserve to be fucking happy. And like, don't give up on that.
And you started a hashtag, right?
Yeah, I turned it into a hashtag.
All right. So actually, Medha wants to ask you a question about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I've never said this publicly, but I'm a survivor too. And so when we were, reading about you and learning about you, Parimal brought up the fact that you started this hashtag. And so I started to read about it. I was wondering why you chose Twitter as the forum, because it's so hard to publicly say that this happened to you. And why would you choose Twitter as opposed to, say, a closed Facebook where people would feel more comfortable at first?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for disclosing. Like, it's never easy. And I think, like, the reason why I wanted it to be public was because when I was a youth and I was raped, it was like such a dirty secret. It was like I didn't talk about it ever. And I remember it was like this shameful thing that like nobody talked about. It was like, and I love my dad so much. And I asked him actually to write me a survivor love letter. But when I was a teenager, it was like I disappeared from his vocabulary. He would like update relatives and other people about my brother and how proud he was. And then like when it would come to me, it was like I was no longer a member of the family. And it was so painful because like the hardest thing for me at that time was like getting out of bed. But he couldn't celebrate that. Like, how do you tell somebody like, oh, my daughter like got out of bed today? It was just like, you couldn't do that. You couldn't celebrate that in any kind of public way. So I thought like, I want to be able to publicly celebrate survivors. Like that was important to me. So I wanted to do it with a hashtag on Twitter. And then in doing that, I partnered with Sui Park, and like at that time, like she could just like instantly make things go viral, so like she was like so generous in like sort of teaching me about hashtag activism. And Patrice also participated, Patrice Colors, and all these other amazing women of color. But like it was very fueled by like Asian American women survivors in particular. And through that first year, I met so many survivors who wrote letters to themselves and tweeted from like across the country that like something that felt so isolating to me. I just made like all these amazing survivor friends. And what was weird is like, this is like the third year of the project. On top of it, like going viral and getting written up in like Teen Vogue and Cosmopolitan and sort of that type of thing. I had like slumber parties with like new survivor friends in DC and like just met all these dope survivors who I never would have connected with any other way. And like the sort of weird commonality that I started to realize about making friends with all of these survivors is like we could go from talking about like the darkest shit about like our trials and like the things that had happened to us, the violence that had occurred, to then like having a dance party. And I was like, I can't do that with anyone. people would think that I'm crazy, to go from like absolute pain to like such ecstatic joy in the next moment. And it's something that I hold so precious because like I've never been able to foster that kind of dynamic with like any other kind of person. And I think it's that what's interesting to me is with Me Too and sort of this new very vocal energy right now politically around survivorship. I think it's important to center survivors and femi survivors of color because I think it's pointing us in this exciting political direction that will be helpful in destroying white supremacy and misogyny and patriarchy and all the things that are affecting us. I mean, so many of like the folks on the front lines, have been survivors in the undocumented community, in the Black Lives Matter community, in the trans community, at Standing Rock. That may not be the banner that they have worn as warriors in those spaces, but privately, that is an experience that they hold. And part of what has brought them into this work with the same fierce rage. So maybe that is a long-winded way of answering your question of like what drives me. And I think it is like that purity in my my rage that prevents me from sleeping is because I know all of these survivors, and I won't stop until like we're all free.
One thing you've talked about is, and I think I'm quoting you in this, is emotional precision and vulnerability. I guess the question is, then how do you provide an environment through your filmmaking, through your activism? How do you create an environment that allows people to open up and to share where they are and their experiences? And then how can we use this to build a community?
Oh, these are all really good questions. You mean in terms of documentary filmmaking, sure. Mm-hmm. or all of the above?
All of the above.
All of the above. Mm-hmm.
How do we create safe spaces? How do we create vulnerable spaces? I think it's an inside-outside approach because as we're engaged in work that can be deeply traumatizing in spaces where folks are literally at war with white supremacists or the government or folks who are trying to deport them. One of the things that I've realized is to not think of yourself only as a container for grief, to take care of your own well-being in the process. Because if you are theorizing all of these values but not applying them to your own well-being, you're going to start to fall apart. And then your storytelling will be no good in the process. So that work helps facilitate those spaces. I think also in terms of practically as a filmmaker, how to facilitate those spaces. It's really important that you center and honor people's lived experiences. And as you're filming, you pick your alliances very carefully in terms of when you're taking a project, it sort of becomes your baby. And then when you're figuring out if it continues to be independent or if you are getting financed by a network, it no longer belongs to you. Therefore, you lose all your control. And I think especially for filmmakers of color, usually when you work with a network, that means all of a sudden you're working with white folks. And I'm not against working with white folks. all the time. But I would say once money gets involved, there are a lot of compromises that start to be made in terms of vision, in terms of execution, in terms of process. And it's very important that when you're working in community, you create a process that everybody is on board with. And as you're continuing to work in that way, how you finance that process is in alignment with it.
How was partnering with the Sundance Institute then?
That felt amazing for me because they really center...
Good white folk.
Well, for me, they are very creator-centered. It's not like working with a network where they're like trying to poach creativity out of you. They are very invested in your vision and nurturing and mentoring you. So it was a really cleansing, it was a really, really deep experience for me to be involved in that with my writing partner, Elan Holt.
I want to ask one quick question about Resist.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little about the project. I know it delved into the $3.5 billion jail plan.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about, and this would be actually open to question to both of you. Delve into what exactly did you tackle from a topic perspective, what this meant in terms of the BLM movement, and just what's the action you wanted to come out of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this movement is live. I mean, like, this podcast is local, and this is a local fight. So the fight against the $3.5 billion jail is still ongoing, and the coalitions that were built through Resist are all based out of Los Angeles. The coalition is called Justice LA, and there are folks from all over Los Angeles who have come together to take down that $3.5 billion jail. And so, even though the series is over, I think the fight continues.
Sure.
So I would just ask your listeners to, check out the series. It's 12 episodes, 10 minutes each. You can download it. It's an app on Black Pills, so you can watch it for free. And so I think it delves into a lot of the issues around the prison industrial complex. And so, once you learn everything about this sort of thriving local movement and all of the key players, you can literally go out and meet them in the field and join them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually want to kind of praise Tani for her direction on a lot of the series that we did. And when it comes to collecting stories, I should sit back a little bit. When it comes to collecting stories, I believe that it's important that you have the right team and the right preparation going into it. Because one of the things we had to make sure to do, and Tani was great at this, listen, we're going to someone's home. We're going to someone's community. We need to respect it here, and that's important when you're getting that information and you're building this story, because these stories, it was, while it was about the plan overall, we were telling stories and people's experiences with them. There's a woman who's telling a story about her son who was murdered in prison. And that's a very deep story to get. And you have, people who were in prison who endure all types of abuse. And we have to get these stories so people can understand why this prison industrial complex is a huge, huge problem. And we have the largest prison system on earth in Los Angeles.
Indeed, yeah. Well, thank you both for sharing these great stories. Where can we find both of you online? Is there a Twitter handle, website, email, whatever you want to share? What can you find? Tani, let's start with you since you have the mic in front of you. Let's start.
Okay.
Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Vidastar, Vidastarr, and the same on Instagram. It's pretty easy to find me.
Okay, excellent. Tani, how about you? Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Tani Appleseed.
Okay.
And then Instagram is Tani Ikeda.
Okay. And Tani spelled Tani.
Tani.
And Tani, one last
Ikeda.
question. So you write survivor letters, you've built a community, you've built many different communities, you've won an Emmy, you're part of the Sundance Lab. What's next?
I'd love for the script that we're working on, Sealskin Woman, to actually accumulate into a feature film. So I'm hoping that we can just keep chipping away at it and keep going through the labs and turn it into a real film.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely get the word out on our podcast on that.
Absolutely.
So, is there a place people could find out more about the film, a website, or any information you could share online, or is that available?
Yeah, my website is taniikeda.com.
Excellent. Okay. So a little quick about us real quick. You'd find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you want to email us, we're at asian.highway.live@gmail.com. We're on Facebook at Asian Highway 1 or AH1. You could follow us on Twitter. Our handle is AH1 Live. Our Instagram is also AH1 Live.
And to listen to this story and others, you can definitely find us on iTunes, on YouTube, on Spotify, and Google Play Music.
Arigato gozaimasu.
Well, again, speaking of thank yous, thank you to Rachel Stein for being in here today as part of our team. Thank you to Marvin UF for always being an amazing producer. Of course, big thank you to Visual Communications here in Little Tokyo. Debesh and Medha, thank you so much for always being great co-hosts. And this is episode 8. We thank you for having our two great guests here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Be good, y'all.